It's my sister Rachel and a very dear friend. My name is Ismana Carney. So we'll give you a little bit of history about, let's start with the big picture, MMIP or MMIW. How many of you are familiar with that acronym? Okay, so those of you that have read it here, so MMIP stands for Murdered and Missing Indigenous People in this country. Originally, it was a woman and girl-centered movement that started in around 2011 in Canada. It all came out through a Métis Native artist whose name is this working well? So can I just throw my voice anyway? Yeah. Okay, so yes. So the artist's name is Jamie Black. Her tribe is Métis, which is a Canadian tribe. And she was visiting many of the reserves in Canada, which is what they call the Indian reservations there, and had a chance to talk with elders and grandmas and aunties and the women, and found this theme with all the conversations she was having that had to do with daughters and wives and mothers and women and girls simply disappearing, never to be heard from again, with no response from either tribal police and or the law enforcement officers outside the reserve. And she came to find out that this was an experience that families were having in Canada over generations. So it wasn't an unusual thing. And people were sort of inured to the fact that it's been a year, I haven't heard from her, so I'm figuring she's disappeared. And that was the word that they used. So Jamie was so moved and so deeply and soulfully sort of wounded by this thought that as an artist, she came up with what she thought would be a very powerful image to message that, number one, the invisibility, number two, the resounding silence, and number three, the absolute lack of response on either side, in Indian community as well as outside Indian community. So she came up with this exhibit, which was empty red dresses hanging in the Toronto Museum of Art in absolute silence, and the impact that that would have, literally representing spirits and women who simply vacated the dress that they would have been wearing, with no one knowing the story behind it whatsoever. So that red dress exhibit just took on like a wildfire, and within about 5 years, across Canada, within about 5 years, it was exhibited at the Smithsonian Museum of the Native American for the first time. And since then, with the voices in this country of Native families and reservations and communities who realized, oh, same across the border, same right here, by the way. And so what's happened is that the voices continued and finally reached the White House. And this was in 2021. And reached the White House in a very powerful way by our very own Sand City Mayor, Mayor Marianne Carbone, who herself is Chumash. She's a Native Indigenous woman. She's the first Indigenous mayor in the state of California. So in case you all aren't aware of this, we have an Indigenous mayor right here in Monterey County. Ellen, myself, Rachel work very closely with Marianne. SICG, which is the organization that Diana mentioned, supporting Indigenous communities group, is basically us. We're a small group of women led by Marianne, mostly Native-led. And we're here to really support our mayor, but also one of our noted Indigenous leaders and elders, to promote her Indigenous initiatives. So with that in mind, what we did this May is we put on our first Red Dress Day event in Seaside at the Oldermeyer Center. We saw about 150 folk attend. A number of Pacific Grove Library staff arrived and volunteers, and were so impressed by first of all, the art exhibit, which was much, much more richer than this, because we had the space, we had the Oldermeyer Center ballroom. And so that's what led to this exhibit. But we also, it was a traditional Native gathering. So we had dancers and singers and Native storytellers. We had a panel discussion to discuss all of the legislation that's now being implemented in the state of California in and around MMIP. So for example, with Assemblyman James Ramos, who we're hoping to have at our Red Dress Day event next year on May 4th, he pretty much single-handedly, and then with the support of others who came around him, including Governor Newsom, instated what we call a silver feather alert, or a feather alert. So you all know about Amber Alert, on the freeway. So now we have a feather alert. So if you're on the freeway, you'll see a little feather icon. It'll say feather alert. And what that means is that there's a Native American or Indigenous person that's missing under suspicious circumstances. So that was signed into law just last year by Governor Newsom. So just so that you all know, and we're the second state in the whole of the country that's enacted this. So just so that you all know that the state of California, under the leadership that we have right now, is really doing some, pathfinding, barrier-breaking work. And we're modeling a very aggressive, to use that word in a good way, a very aggressive response to President Biden and his administration, who have now mandated for the United States Department of Justice and all of the other states in the country, as well as our general attorney here, that MMIP is now going to be a priority at the federal and state levels in terms of addressing this issue. So that's basically sort of a background history of Red Dress Day, the exhibit. I'm going to have Rachel talk about her personal experience in actually being invited to and then creating a wonderful art exhibit itself, which you all can enjoy here. But just so that you all know, we're doing this again next year. We'd love your support. Any of you who'd like to be involved in these initiatives. We continued with a second initiative next year. We've instated a high-impact MMI training for law enforcement, which we're getting certified as a state-certified training that's going to be delivered by the Yurok tribe and their law enforcement officers and trainers. The Yurok tribe are now the model tribe in the country in terms of addressing MMIP. So we've got their top trainers coming in to train. I just want to give you an idea of this sort of movement that we're starting right here in Monterey County. I'm working directly with the Chief of Police of San City, David Honda, to get the training state certified. That means any law enforcement officer in any part of the country, in any part of California, can come up here for that training. It has their continuation education credits. So just to give you an idea of the wonderful work that we're doing, and then the deepening of that work with individuals like Diana Godwin, and then expanding and stretching out what we're doing, for example, into one of our local libraries. So we're looking at really expanding and moving at least this issue. There are many issues, but this is an issue that has sort of grabbed our hearts. If Marianne Carbone was here, she'd be telling you stories of sex-trafficked, missing Indigenous women and girls right here in Monterey County. And the issues in and around the problems between different law enforcement agencies and the challenges to really get these addressed. Right now, they're lying in files someplace. with no follow-up, as everywhere else in the country. So we can say right here, we're really, making that move. And so on behalf of Marianne Carbone, who can't be here tonight, she's off to Yosemite at a bear dance ceremony with the Yosemite people. I'm going to hand it over to Rachel and have Rachel share her experience with MMIP, but also with curating this beautiful exhibit.
Osio, it's a beautiful evening. I'm very, very honored and pleased to be here. Thank you to Diana and Kathy and the staff here for having us and inviting us to come and present this for a whole month, Indigenous Peoples Month, which is dear to my heart, our hearts, your hearts as well. It's a lot to take in what my sister just said. When Marianne and Ismana asked me if I would make some sort of special exhibit, all of you are probably readers, and you probably know Louise Penny. And she had a wonderful influence on a TV show that was just, unfortunately, one season called Three Pines, which took place in Canada. And in the very first scene of that first episode, what came on first were Native women in their red and in their drums and going to the police station and protesting about MMIP and MMIW. And I was like, yes, it's getting out there, nationwide, here we go. And that theme followed that first episode all the way through. And so the information was coming out and coming out and coming out in different media. And then just recently, I found, I don't know if any of you have watched the show Longmire, which is Craig Johnson's series of Western, modern Western drama. And he, too, has written a book, and it's called Daughter of the Morning Star. And he had found out about MMIW and MMIP. And so he dedicated this book. His whole acknowledgement in the front is about the movement. And so again, here we go. And he's stating facts and he's educating people, right? So here we are having more and more exposure. And then events like this also help us to get the word out. For my small part of this, as I was watching Three Pines, they have an art gallery. And in that art gallery were some beautiful, beautiful portraits. And you could see outside in the back red dresses hanging in the trees. And I was just like crying because it was just like so moving to me to see this. And so one of the portraits is right here. I was so moved by this Canadian artist, John, and his wonderful vision that came through his sister. And he created, it's called Still Dancing. And when you have an opportunity later, if you'll step over and see it, you'll see that all the tiny little squares there are all portraits of missing and murdered Indigenous women. And he has taken those from actual posters that have been printed by the families. And he got their permission, and he created this beautiful portrait. His sister said to him, it's so important that our sisters know we haven't forgotten them. We are still dancing for them. And so please come over when you can and to pay homage to them. At my home, this hangs up in my house, my little abode. And in the mornings when I'm doing my prayers, I go over and I do just a little dance and a little prayer for them. I invite you to think about that And maybe some days, somehow in some way, you might as well, take a moment and dance for these missing and murdered Indigenous women. And I just want to acknowledge the dress that's up here because it's very dear to my heart. My niece, Elizabeth Smith, who is Lakota, created this dress, a traditional Lakota dress, for this exhibit. The pendant is one of mine. The shawl is one of mine that my sister gave me many years ago and carries a lot of good medicine. All these other dresses represent, through the ages. It doesn't mean that it's what you're wearing. You can wear a slinky red dress. You can wear a business suit. You can be a little girl in a little T-shirt and jeans. The age, it can be from under a year old and to elder. So it's really important to know it's through the ages. It's not just young people. Sometimes people go, oh, well, she asked for it, whatever. That's not true. And I used to teach self-defense for women, and I've heard a lot of stories through the years. And what I do know is that we all have rights, all of us. And so I want to thank you for this evening, for coming and listening to us. And our poet has arrived. And so I'd like to turn it back over to Diana. And I'd like to say wado, which is thank you. And it is indeed a privilege to be here this evening. Thank you so much for coming.